In all of the Pokemon games, the collective number of all Pokemon combined is over 1,000 Pokemon. That's a lot of Pokemon to be able to use, but in competitive Pokemon, it's a completely different game compared to the actual Pokemon games. The difference is so big, in fact, that they might as well have their own separate Pokédexes. That's how different the Pokemon that are used in competitive Pokemon and actual Pokemon games is. In competitive Pokemon, the amount of viable Pokemon that is used is only a handful of the 1,021 of all the available Pokemon. And as the years pass and new generations go on, it forces competitive Pokemon to change as well. Whether it's a change in the format used that limits the Pokemon that can be used, or the introduction of new Pokemon that are just a level above the competition, and that adds more to the tally of Pokemon that are viable in competitive Pokemon. However, as generations come and go, and new Pokemon are added into the game, there's always been one Pokemon that has been dominant ever since it was introduced in 2012. A Pokemon so strong, in fact, has been seen on a team at every single Pokemon World Championships after 2012. A Pokemon so strong that, in fact, it had a grasp on competitive Pokemon for over a decade. Now, if you're familiar to competitive Pokemon, you'll probably know who this Pokemon is. But if you're not, let me introduce you to it. This is Landorus T, one of the 3 Forces of Nature legendaries, alongside Thundurus and Tornadus, who also have been dominant since they were introduced, but not as dominant as Landorus, more specifically Landorus T. Now you might be wondering what makes this one so much better than this one. Well, let me show you. Both of the Landoruses have the exact same type, ground and flying. Now this type is a very good type pairing as it allows for Landorus to be able to have 2 immunities, and these are to electric moves and ground moves. 2 types that would be super effective to them individually, with electric being super effective against flying and ground being super effective to, well, ground. And with ground being immune to electric and flying being immune to ground, it allows for the type to gain 2 immunities that they would usually be weak to. Now, for the defenses. Landorus has 3 types that are not very effective against it. And those types are fighting, poison, and rock. And only 2 types are super effective against it. And those types are water, which is 2 times effective against it, and ice, which is 4 times effective against it. But a good typing doesn't matter if the Pokemon stats aren't very good itself. So how about I show you the differences in the stats of the 2 versions and why the stat changes make Landorus T so much better than Landorus. Both of the Landoruses have the exact same HP stat, being 89. And the next stat is what makes Landorus T so much better than Landorus. Landorus has a base attack stat of 125. However, Landorus T has a base attack stat of 145, a whole 20 more than Landorus. Now you might be thinking, that's not that much better, but trust me, it's a huge difference. They both have the exact same defense stat, being 90. And in special attack, Landorus has a special attack of 115. However, Landorus T loses some stats in special attack and only has a stat of 105. I'll explain why this is much better shortly. The next stat is special defense, and both of the Landorus have the exact same base stat in special defense, with them both having 80. And the final stat is speed, and Landorus has a base speed of 101, and Landorus T has a base stat of 91. Another little difference between the 2 forms. So now you might be wondering, how is Landorus T so much better than Landorus if the only stat difference is in 20 in the attack? Well, let me explain why it is. The best moves that Landorus uses in VGC Pokemon are mainly all physical attacking moves. Some of the moves that are used a lot include moves like Stomping Tantrum and Rock Slide, 2 physically attacking moves. And this is why the higher base stat in the attack is much better, as it allows for moves to hit harder and do more damage. And the higher attack stat allows for Landorus T to have an attack range of 216 when the attack IVs are all maxed out. Now, the slower stat speed might make you think that Landorus T wouldn't be able to get as much moves off, since it would get targeted by faster Pokemon. So how players manage to find a solution to this is to max out Landorus T's speed IVs and give it the item Choice Scarf. Now, Choice Scarf is an item which increases the Pokemon's speed while it is holding the item. And I haven't even got to the abilities yet. But before I describe the abilities, if you are enjoying this video so far, then do please consider subscribing to the channel. Thank you. Speaking of abilities, this is what makes Landorus T so much better than base Landorus. Game Freak, the developers of Pokemon, decided it would be a good idea to give Landorus T Intimidate. Why? I don't even know. But if you don't know what Intimidate does, Intimidate is an ability that lowers the opposing Pokemon's attacking stat by 1. So this allows for Landorus T to be able to support his team and to be able to counter one of its biggest weaknesses, which is his bulk. Intimidate allows the Landorus T to be able to survive more, as the lower attack stat means that Landorus will take less damage, obviously. And with all this in mind, you can see why in competitive Pokemon, why base form Landorus only has a 0.90% usage rate, and Landorus T has a whopping 40.44% usage rate. A whole 40% more than base Landorus. Ever since Landorus T was introduced in 2012, over the whole decade, Landorus T has been able to dominate in competitive Pokemon. In the 2013 Pokemon World Championships, the first World Championships after it was introduced, in 2012, Landorus T placed second and third in the competition. In the 2015 Pokemon World Champions, Landorus T was arguably at its most dominant it has ever been, with Landorus T being on 12 of the 16 teams in the top 16, with it also placing first in Worlds. Only 4 teams didn't include Landorus T on their teams. And what adds more to the total domination Landorus T had during that year's World Championships is the fact that, if you saw that, Landorus T was featured on every single team in the top 8 of that World Championships. Basically, if you didn't have Landorus T on your team during that year, you were going to lose no matter what. And I don't think that there'll ever be another Pokemon that will cause that much domination in a single tournament that it gets featured in every single team for the top 8 of that tournament. I don't think that will ever, and if that doesn't scream domination, I don't know what does, because that shows the power that Landorus T had. And after 3 years of Landorus T barely placing in the top 16 at Worlds, in the 2018 Pokemon World Championships, in the 2018 Pokemon World Championships, it returned to its dominant form, with it yet again being on 12 of the 16 teams in the top 16 of the World Championships. And yet again, Landorus T was prominent in the top 8 of that year's World Championships, being on 6 of the top 8 teams of that year's competitions. That is 80% of the teams of that year's World Championships featuring Landorus T. And if that doesn't scream domination, I don't know what does. And that is 6 years after the Pokemon was first introduced as well. And in this year's Pokemon World Championships, 2023 Pokemon World Championships, a whole decade later since Landorus T was actually introduced, it was prominent during the whole World Championships, with most notably Landorus T coming in first and third during the tournament. You could look at any moment in Pokemon VGC history and there will probably be a Landorus T somewhere. It was even in one of the most infamous Pokemon clips of all time.
And the first attack of the game is a miss as Stonehenge misses, but Rotom's Will-O-Wisp also missing. That Protect doesn't want to get burnt by Rotom. And it does. Oh, and the Avoid comes out.
Hopefully both the trainers give their Pokemon a pep talk this game to help them aim a little bit better, because they were losing turns mostly to accuracy last game, and I see that hasn't changed.
And the Will-O-Wisp out from Rotom also are going to be avoided, but it is going to try for another Will-O-Wisp. Will it hit? No, of course not. Aaron's Pokemon really putting forth the effort for this last game of this best of 3. The confusion. Rotom gets the Will-O-Wisp, and it hits! Rotom finally gets the Will-O-Wisp to connect!
Yeah, that infamous clip, which we have all seen. And that clip happened in the 2013 Pokemon World Championships. Just so you know, that is a whole decade later, and Landorus T is still prominent in competitive Pokemon today, a whole decade later. Now that just shows how strong it is to be able to do that. I don't think there'll ever be a Pokemon as dominant in competitive Pokemon history more than Landorus T. I mean, it's not likely that many Pokemon stay relevant in competitive Pokemon after a new generation comes out, and it's even more unlikely that a Pokemon stays relevant for over a decade, and even more stay dominant during the whole decade, winning World Championships after World Championships. So, there you have it. A Pokemon so strong in competitive Pokemon that it's been able to stay dominant for over a decade. So, let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Landorus T will eventually fall off? Do you ever think there'll be another Pokemon as dominant as Landorus T is? And do you ever think there'll ever be a competitive Pokemon season, or should I be more specific, a competitive or a Pokemon World Championships without Landorus T being involved at all? I personally don't think there will be, but who knows in the future? There's still plenty more time left in the world to find out if Landorus T can survive another decade or so of being constantly in the Pokemon World Championships. And if it does, I think this is the most dominant Pokemon of all time. Let me know in the comments below. And I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, then please consider subscribing to the channel, and please consider leaving a like on the video. And if you want to see more of this, then let me know in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.